For months, the loudest voices in sports media told a story about Shedeur Sanders that almost everyone believed. They painted him as arrogant, selfish, impossible to coach, and too immature to lead an NFL team. But the strange thing about narratives is that they fall apart the moment real evidence shows up. And in Cleveland, that moment came faster than anyone expected. Because while the Browns organization has been drowning in chaos, coaching blunders, a collapsing roster, and a fan base on the edge, the one person consistently holding things together is the rookie they spent all offseason tearing down. And that's where this story really begins. Instead of the ego-driven villain the media scripted, Cleveland fans saw something entirely different. A player running back onto the field with a cut-open finger because he didn't want to put his backup in a bad spot. A rookie who defended his teammate before defending himself. A quarterback who never threw shade at his coaches, even when their decisions left him running for his life. And most importantly, a leader who kept improving while the entire system around him was breaking apart. Now, the same people who called him overhyped are being forced to admit there's something real happening in Cleveland, and it's getting harder to ignore. Because when the stadium boos the backup and cheers for the rookie they were told to hate, that's not an accident. That's a franchise waking up. But to understand how everything flipped so fast, you need to see what fans were never supposed to notice. The entire narrative around Shedeur Sanders started cracking the moment he sprinted back onto the field, finger torn open, refusing to let his backup drown in a moment he wasn't prepared for. It didn't take a highlight reel throw or some miracle touchdown for fans to see the truth. It took a simple decision driven by loyalty, not ego. And that alone exposed just how wrong the media had been about him. Because everything they claimed he wasn't, accountable, unselfish, protective of his teammates, he showed in a single sequence. But the real shift happened in the stands. When Shedeur was forced out of the game, you could hear the stadium change. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't frustration at the injury. It was the sound of tens of thousands of Browns fans booing Dillon Gabriel the moment he stepped onto the field. This wasn't about Gabriel as a person. It was about who they wanted leading their offense. For months, people insisted Shedeur fans were just loud online. But this time it was Twitter fingers. It was Cleveland, in real time, making it clear. They trusted the rookie more than the veteran the coaches kept forcing into the lineup. And what did Shedeur do when asked about the reaction? He didn't gloat, he didn't take shots, he didn't feed the divide. Instead, he apologized to Gabriel for putting him in that situation, and went out of his way to respect a teammate the fan base had just rejected. That's not arrogance. That's composure. That's leadership. That's something most rookies don't figure out for years and some never do. Meanwhile, the people who pushed the Shedeur is selfish storyline fell silent. Because how do you twist footage of a guy defending everyone but himself? Reports suggest even some members of the Browns media were surprised by the crowd's reaction, realizing that the fan base hadn't bought the narrative they'd been fed. And once that curtain gets pulled back, it's impossible to unsee. This was the moment Cleveland realized they weren't watching the character the media created. They were watching the real Shedeur Sanders. Someone who's not dividing the locker room but protecting it. Someone who's not running from pressure but running back onto the field to carry it. And this was only the beginning. Because once the fans shifted, the people inside the building had to face an uncomfortable truth. What happened in the stadium wasn't just a loud moment, it was a turning point. For the first time all season, the energy around the Browns shifted from quiet frustration to something sharper, something undeniable. And it wasn't directed at Shedeur. It was directed at the idea that he wasn't supposed to be the guy. Because after weeks of hearing that he was too immature, too raw, or too arrogant, fans finally trusted what their own eyes were telling them. The offense simply looks different when he's in control. You could feel it across Cleveland media too. The same reporters who spent months questioning Shedeur's readiness suddenly found themselves acknowledging his growth. Analysts who once dismissed him as a project began pointing out his improved pocket presence, his smart checkdowns, his ability to extend drives when everything breaks down around him. Even local commentators, the ones who usually hide behind objective analysis, started to shift their tone. Some admitted the team plays harder and responds differently when he's on the field. That's not small talk. That's a franchise realizing it may have underestimated its own rookie. But the most interesting part, speculative chatter suggests there's a quiet divide inside the building. Some reportedly see Shedeur as the future, the player worth building a real system around. Others remain loyal to the original plan, still hesitant to pivot from decisions made months before he ever took a snap. It's not open conflict, but you can sense the tension growing. The rookie they weren't supposed to rely on is outshining the veteran they were told to trust. And the fan base feels it. Cleveland isn't fooled by PR soundbites. They can see the difference between a quarterback surviving the scheme and a quarterback elevating the scheme. They're watching Shedeur make the most out of broken protection, injured weapons, and inconsistent play calling, and somehow still finding ways to compete. That's not luck. That's leadership showing through the cracks of a flawed system. The shift in support isn't accidental, it's earned. And now that fans have made their stance clear, the Browns, decision makers, can't pretend they don't hear it. Because once a fan base chooses its quarterback, it becomes very hard for a franchise to choose anything else. But respect didn't come from applause or headlines. It came from something far more important: Shedeur's steady improvement when everything around him kept crumbling. For all the noise surrounding Shedeur Sanders, the one thing most critics conveniently avoided discussing was the part that actually mattered: his growth on the field. Week after week, when the narratives got louder, the team got messier, and the pressure got heavier, Shedeur quietly kept sharpening the parts of his game that separate rookies from long-term starters. And he didn't do it behind a perfect offensive line or with a fully healthy roster. He did it in the middle of constant chaos. Look at how he handled the pocket early in the season. People mocked him for taking unnecessary sacks, claiming he held onto the ball too long. But now, he's stepping up with purpose, sliding out of collapsing pockets, keeping his eyes downfield, and taking exactly what the defense gives him. Those boring checkdowns that casual fans ignore. That's maturity. That's a quarterback learning how to win drives instead of chasing highlights. Even Browns analysts pointed it out. He moved better, processed quicker, and didn't force throws that weren't there. That's not accidental. That's intentional development. And then there's his mobility. Critics insisted he wasn't athletic enough to extend plays in the NFL. Yet here he is, ripping off key scrambles, dodging defenders, and turning broken plays into first downs. Reports claim some inside the league are surprised by how natural his movement looks, especially behind an offensive line that's practically stitched together with duct tape at this point. When a rookie can create production in situations where most quarterbacks would fold, that says something powerful about who he could become. But what makes all of this even more significant is the context. He's improving while the team around him is falling apart. Injured playmakers, inconsistent protection, questionable play calling. None of it has stopped him from taking another step forward. That's why fans are warming up to him. They're watching a player who doesn't shrink when things go wrong. Instead, he adjusts, resets, and tries again. And that's the part people don't want to highlight because it contradicts the old narrative. If Shedeur really was immature, uncoachable, or arrogant, he wouldn't be growing. He wouldn't be fixing weaknesses. He wouldn't be carrying himself with the patience and poise he shows in every interview. His improvement isn't an accident, it's a trend. And when a rookie is rising while everything else is sinking, it forces a tough question. Where is all this chaos around him really coming from? If Shedeur's growth has been a steady climb, the rest of the Browns' operation has been a slow, painful collapse. And the truth is, no rookie quarterback, no matter how talented, should be forced to navigate this level of dysfunction. Week after week, Cleveland has looked less like an NFL franchise and more like a team desperately trying to tape the walls together while the ceiling caves in. And it shows everywhere you look. Start with the injuries. The Browns didn't just lose players, they lost pillars. Their entire offensive identity took a blow when Quinshon Judkins went down with a dislocated ankle and fractured fibula. This wasn't just losing a running back. This was losing the heartbeat of the offense, the one steady presence that helped Shedeur stay balanced in early game scripts. Add in Dylan Sampson, David Njoku, multiple O-linemen, and countless depth pieces, and suddenly Cleveland's starting lineup looks like a preseason roster thrown into a regular season war zone. And that offensive line, calling it patchwork would be generous. Protection collapses in seconds. Tight ends are forced to chip every snap. Running lanes disappear before they're drawn. This isn't a unit struggling, it's a unit surviving. And every Sunday, Shedeur is expected to operate behind it as if nothing's wrong. Even opposing defenses have admitted it. Cleveland is beat up, mismatched, and overextended in the trenches. Then there's the coaching, the part fans are no longer quiet about. You can hear the frustration bubbling from the stands to social media. The questionable 4th and 2 call, the botched field goal operation, the lack of situational awareness, the predictable second-half collapses. Reports claim there's tension building inside the building, with whispers that Stefanski's decision-making has started wearing thin on the locker room. Whether that's true or just speculation, one thing is debatable. These mistakes keep costing the Browns games they should win. And through it all, Shedeur is supposed to be the calm center of the storm. A rookie, running a wounded offense, behind a broken line, while the coaching staff makes head-scratching decisions that fans can't ignore. Yet somehow, he's the one part of the team that continues improving. That contrast, his rise versus the team's collapse, is what's starting to scare people, because it raises a question Cleveland can't avoid. If the rookie is growing while the structure around him is falling apart, what does that say about where the real problem is? If there was one storyline the media pushed harder than anything else, it was the idea that Shedeur Sanders wasn't a leader. They said he was selfish, uncoachable, divisive, too wrapped up in his image to care about the team around him. But the problem with manufactured narratives is that they crumble as soon as real behavior shows up. And week after week, Shedeur has shown something the critics never expected: genuine, consistent leadership. The moment he returned to the field after his injury, not for glory, not for stats, but because he didn't want to leave Dillon Gabriel exposed, told you everything about who he is. The cameras didn't ask him about Gabriel. No reporter forced the conversation. Yet Shedeur brought it up himself, apologizing for putting his teammate in a tough position. That's not ego, that's brotherhood. Then came the interview moment that made even some of his haters pause. When a reporter tried to bait him into criticizing the coaching decision on 4th and 2, Shedeur didn't take the trap. Instead, he pushed back, not with anger, not with media-trained cliches, but with a message about unity. He reminded the room that questions meant to divide only hurt the team. He encouraged positivity, accountability, and forward momentum. That's emotional intelligence most veterans struggle with, let alone rookies. And what about the accusations that he throws teammates under the bus? The facts simply don't support it. When Jerry Jeudy's mistake led to an interception last week, Shedeur didn't shade him. He didn't deflect blame. Instead, he praised Jeudy's work ethic and made it clear he trusts him completely. The media ran with a storyline that never matched the footage, and fans who actually watch the games are beginning to notice the disconnect. Reports suggest even inside the Browns' locker room, players respect how he carries himself. He's the same guy every day, calm, focused, steady. He doesn't point fingers. He doesn't make excuses. Even under pressure, even behind a collapsing offensive structure, he holds himself accountable first. And that's why the narrative is dying. Not because of PR, not because of hype, but because his actions contradict every negative rumor. The truth is simple. Shedeur Sanders isn't just avoiding drama, he's actively keeping the locker room together. And his teammates aren't the only ones feeling that shift. Because the rookie class around him has started forming something powerful, something that could reshape Cleveland's future. While the outside world kept arguing about Shedeur Sanders, something far more important was happening behind the scenes. A young core was forming its own identity inside the Browns' locker room. And quietly, without media narratives or dramatic headlines, this rookie group has become the emotional spine of the entire offense. They aren't just teammates. They're a unit built through shared pressure, shared responsibility, and now, shared heartbreak. Nothing showed that bond more clearly than the reaction to Quinshon Judkins' injury. One moment he was the Browns' engine, the guy who dragged the offense forward when everything else broke down, and the next, he was being carted off with a dislocated ankle and fractured fibula. It wasn't just a football moment. It was a gut punch, and you could see it all over the rookies' faces. Dylan Sampson didn't hold back, calling Judkins his brother, explaining how they'd built a bond since day one, and how the injury stuck in his mind the entire game. Harold Fannin said the same, that the loss hit hard because Q wasn't just a teammate, but a foundational piece of what they were trying to build. This wasn't generic locker room sympathy. It was genuine emotion, something that only comes from players who have been carrying a franchise together since the moment they arrived. And right in the center of that young foundation stands Shedeur. He's not towering over anyone. He's not barking orders or drowning the room with bravado. Instead, he's been steady, guiding by example, keeping the tone focused, protecting teammates when the pressure rises. Reports claim some inside the organization are starting to notice this shift, quietly acknowledging that the rookie class might be the Browns' best chance at building a real future. It's speculation, but it fits what we're seeing on the field. These young guys feed off each other, trust each other, and rise together. When the older veterans fall to injury or frustration, it's the rookies stepping into the emotional void. And in a franchise known for locker room chaos, that's not normal, that's culture building. Even more telling, they're doing it while the team is battered, the coaching is questioned, and the season feels like a storm with no clear direction. But instead of splintering, the rookie group has stayed united. And that unity only raises a bigger question. If these young players are already becoming the heart of the team, then what does that make the quarterback at the center of it? Because the next section forces Cleveland to face the question it's been avoiding. As the season drags on and the Browns continue stumbling through inconsistency, something unexpected has started happening among fans, analysts, and even the organization itself. The conversation around Shedeur Sanders is shifting. Not because the team is winning, they're not. Not because the offense suddenly looks polished, it doesn't. But because every week, even in chaos, Shedeur keeps showing growth that simply can't be ignored. And that's forcing people to confront a possibility they weren't ready to consider. See, when Cleveland drafted him, the dominant narrative was that he'd be a flashy backup, a long-term project, maybe even a distraction. But after weeks behind a collapsing offensive line, with an inconsistent play caller and a receiving core still trying to build chemistry, he's delivering something far more valuable than clean stat lines. He's delivering proof of adaptability, the kind that veterans take years to develop. Reports claim that inside the building, coaches and evaluators are noticing how quickly he processes mistakes. One week he holds the ball too long, the next week he's getting it out faster. One week he forces throws, the next he takes checkdowns and keeps drives alive. That kind of week-to-week progression is rare, and it's happening under the worst conditions. Even local media, the same people who spent months tearing him down, are starting to sound different. Some are finally acknowledging the system itself is broken. Others admit that they can't even tell what the offensive identity is supposed to be. When ESPN Cleveland says publicly, "I empathize with the obstacles he's had to overcome," that's not casual commentary. That's a pivot. And pivots like that don't come without reason. But the real turning point came from the fans. When Shedeur left the game with his finger injury and the stadium erupted with boos the moment Dylan Gabriel stepped in, it wasn't just frustration. It wasn't disrespect toward Gabriel. It was the city finally admitting something it had been resisting. Shedeur gives them hope, not perfection, not immediate wins, but hope, something Cleveland hasn't had at quarterback since the franchise rebooted. Hope that a young core can grow together. Hope that leadership can form naturally, not be forced. Hope that the future won't look like the past. And that optimism leads us straight to the biggest question Cleveland has to face, the one that could reshape the entire franchise moving forward. What makes this moment so fascinating for Cleveland isn't just the rookie quarterback outperforming expectations. It's the way the franchise's entire trajectory suddenly feels like it's splitting in two directions. On one side, you have the old Browns, unstable coaching, questionable play calling, and a pattern of wasting young talent before it has a chance to breathe. On the other, you have the version of the Browns fans have been begging for, the version that looks like it could actually build around a young leader instead of breaking him down. And that second path is starting to look a lot more real because of what Shedeur Sanders is doing week after week. What's wild is that none of this was supposed to happen this year. Rumors suggested the Browns brought Shedeur in to sit behind Dylan Gabriel, learn quietly, and maybe compete for a job down the road. Instead, he was thrown into the fire behind a battered offensive line, in a system that hasn't found rhythm in years, and in a city that historically has eaten inexperienced quarterbacks alive. Normally, that spells disaster. But in this case, the pressure is revealing something Cleveland didn't expect, someone who actually thrives in it. Fans aren't cheering for him because of flashy stat lines. They're cheering because they can finally see direction. They can see a rookie who refuses to throw teammates under the bus, refuses to take shortcuts, and refuses to panic even when the entire stadium feels ready to collapse. And with every post-game interview, every correction he makes from week to week, and every moment where he takes accountability for things that weren't even his fault, Cleveland's future feels less like a gamble and more like a foundation. Reports claim the Browns' locker room has also taken notice. Veterans who have spent years dealing with instability are beginning to view Shedeur not as a temporary fill-in, but as someone real, someone worth building around. Even with injuries everywhere, even with a losing record, that kind of internal respect matters. It's the difference between a franchise wandering and a franchise evolving. So now the Browns face a decision that could define the next decade. Keep pretending this season is just another rebuild, or finally lean into the unexpected leader they never thought they'd find this soon. Because the truth is simple, Cleveland doesn't need a perfect quarterback. They need the right one. And they might already have him. When this season began, almost nobody expected the Browns' future to hinge on a rookie drafted into chaos. The media framed him as a risky pick, fans were split, and analysts acted like Shedeur Sanders was walking into Cleveland as nothing more than a temporary fix. But now, after weeks of watching him fight through injuries, bad protection, shaky coaching, and non-stop doubt, one thing is becoming impossible to deny. The narrative people tried to force on him simply doesn't match the player he actually is. Every time Shedeur speaks, he chips away at the lies. He defends teammates who make mistakes. He refuses to let reporters divide the locker room. He takes accountability for problems he didn't cause, and he gives credit away at moments when he could be taking all of it for himself. That's not arrogance, that's leadership. And when a rookie shows that kind of maturity in the middle of the storm Cleveland is experiencing, it sends a message far louder than any stat line. But the biggest shift isn't coming from the media or the coaching staff. It's coming from the fans. The same city that was told to stay skeptical is now booing the backup because they believe in the rookie. The same fan base that's endured decades of disappointment is suddenly seeing a spark, something they haven't felt in years: belief. Not blind hope, not hype, but genuine belief that the future doesn't have to look like the past. That maybe, for once, Cleveland can build instead of reset. And that belief is growing for a reason. Every week, Shedeur shows improvement. Every week, he embraces the pressure instead of running from it. Every week, he earns more of the locker room and more of the city. He's not just surviving in chaos, he's forming an identity inside it. Will he be the franchise quarterback Cleveland's been chasing for years? That answer won't come overnight. But one thing is crystal clear. He's already changed the way the Browns think, the way the fans feel, and the way the future looks. This was supposed to be another messy chapter in a long, frustrating story. Instead, it might be the beginning of a new one.